Hi everyone and welcome to the sew along video. So we're going to start by sewing the patch pocket and I'll be sewing the dress version to start with. When I get to a certain point in the video I'll switch over to doing the t-shirt version. So the only difference between these two, apart from the length, is the hemline is treated differently when you sew it. So to start from the beginning, this is a knit garment, so you're going to need a t-shirting weight, either like viscose, elastane or cotton lycra, or something that's a nice suitable t-shirt summer weight. The seam allowances on this garment are 6mm, and we're going to use our overlocker and 4 threads of overlocking thread on our overlocker. So set your stitch width to 6mm and set your overlocker up with 4 threads of matching colour. In addition to this, we're going to need a plain sewing machine to help construct the hem area on the dress version, and probably you can use it on the t-shirt version as well. As well as that, to do the hems, you're going to either need access to a cover stitch machine or you're going to need a twin needle on a domestic sewing machine. Now I'm going to assume you don't have access to either of those, and I'm just going to use a straight stitch on a plain sewing machine and show you how you can do it that way. Just make sure when you thread your sewing machine up that you have a ball needle in it, and just test your stitches before you begin on spare fabric and a double layer of spare fabric, just to make sure that the tensions are set right. And remember, if you have a problem with the underside of your fabric, it's generally a top thread tension issue, and if you have a problem with the top side of your fabric, it's generally a bobbin tension issue. So let's get started, and we'll start by sewing the patch pocket to the left hand front of the garment, so either the dress or the t-shirt, and that's the left hand front as you're wearing it. So this is our patch pocket piece. It has notches around the outside which show us the hem allowance position. Now at one edge there'll be a notch quite far down, and that's an inch down or 2.5 centimeters, and that's going to be the turn position for the top of our pocket. So right ways up, that's what our pocket is going to look like. But to get started, what we have to do is overlock around all 4 sides of our pocket to secure it and stop it from fraying or unwinding. Sometimes you can get away with just overlocking the top and leaving 3 sides raw. It's really up to you. So notice when we overlock, you can still see the notches through the overlocking, and we need to make sure we can see the notches through our overlocking. Right, so we're going to go to an iron now, and you need to press this at the notch position. So what that means is we're going to press this under 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters at the top, and each of these sides needs to be pressed under 1 centimeter, which is 3/8 of an inch. The other thing to mention is make sure you test your iron temperature on spare fabric before you touch your real fabric. Right, so here is our patch pocket all ironed up. So the first thing we need to do is secure the top edge. So the easiest way I find is if you turn the pocket to the wrong side and stitch a line of stitching from side to side directly through the overlocking line. And there's no need to back tack this. Now because I want to make it look like a commercially sewn garment, what I'm going to do is sew a second line of stitching parallel to the first on the fold side. And the width of that is completely up to you. Right, so now we need to go to our garment and place the pocket in the correct position. Now if you want to, go head back to your iron and just repress those other 3 sides in. If you're happy, just continue. So here is my patch pocket re-ironed and ready to go on the front. And here is my front piece, right side up. And what I've done is I marked the drill holes on my fabric with chalk. I realised you couldn't see it very well in the video, so what I've done is I've just put the head of the needle through the drill hole position. So where this goes in is the drill hole position. Now on the pattern it says that drill holes are marked 1 centimetre in from the final position. So 1 centimetre is 3/8 of an inch. So what that means is you have to imagine, so this is my drill hole here, you have to imagine 1 centimetre in the position there, and that position there is the position of the drill hole. Because what we're trying to do is cover the drill holes, because in commercial pattern making, drill holes are physical holes that the cutters cut into our fabric, and they're physical holes so that we can see where to place. So for our next position, exactly the same thing. There's my chalk. I've just got to imagine 1 centimetre in and down, 3/8 of an inch, and then that goes exactly on top of that drill. Now I'm just going to pin it in the stitch line there. Now make sure you've got ball pins when you're doing this. So with all these little straggly bits of overlocking, if you've chosen to overlock, just make sure they're tucked under. And what we're looking for is to just make sure that our pockets are in the correct position. Or the pocket, not the pockets. So it's more important that the pocket sits flat than the drill hole is in the perfect position, because knit fabric has a tendency to move as you cut it, but we just need to make sure that those drill holes are covered. And the other thing we're looking for is to make sure that this is nice and straight to the neckline, because you don't want your pockets sitting off at an angle either way. So make sure that's nice and flat, and when you're happy, we're going to start sewing it. Now I'm going to start sewing it from this edge here. I'm going to do a small back tack, come down here, stop and pivot. So I stop with my needle down in the corner. I'm going to lift my presser foot, turn and pivot, back around to the beginning, to the other side of the beginning here of the pocket, and I'm going to back tack here as well. So this is where our hand's going to go in up here like this. So take your time. You might need a silicone foot or a roller foot. See how you go. And where I'm going to stitch is on the edge, or just in from the edge. So it's 1/8 of an inch in, which is around about 2 or 3 millimeters. I'm just going to use the guide on my foot as just a reference point for that. Right, so now go back to your iron and give that a press, because that'll just give your final garment a really nice look, and the iron also helps to embed the polyester thread into the fabric. So the next step in our process is to sew on the neckband. So take your neckband and fold it so that wrong side's together and right sides are out. Now if you need to, as you can see, my fabric here is quite curly around the edges, Sometimes if you need to, it's a good idea to just go to your plain sewing machine and just stitch those edges together with a plain stitch just in from the edge, maybe 1/8 of an inch, just to help you guide that through, but that's entirely up to you, and I'm not going to do that. I'll skip that step. So come to your garment, the piece that you've just sewn the front, and let's have a look at it. So here's the centre front here. So we know this is the centre front because there's a small notch in there, and that notch matches to the centre notch here on the neckband. So with this garment, this is a faux V-neck, so it's a scoop that goes into the shape of a V, but it isn't a V, so it's just a relaxed slouchy look. So this is a really easy one to sew if you're struggling with sewing V-necks. It gives you the look of a V-neck without actually having to go to the effort of sewing a V-neck, which can be quite challenging. So this edge here, which is the pointy edge, if you fold that wrong sides together, that edge matches to the pointy edge up here. So what we're going to be doing is just matching that point there, and this is going to be sewn with our overlocker at 6mm. So what we have is right sides together now. So we've got the front right side up and the right side of the band together with it. So come to the center point of the band, and there'll be a notch on either side of that. So that point there, where those two notches are, and I've cut mine a little bit too deep, so I'll have to be very careful when I stitch this on. Ideally, notches should only be cut 1/8 of an inch into the fabric. So that notch point there needs to match to the centre front of the t-shirt here, or the dress, whichever version you're doing. Now this band does need to be stretched into position, although there's only a very gentle stretch. So now we have to overlock that to there with our overlocker, and of course the other end of the band gets pinned to the other end of the point here. So just make sure when you do this that you don't twist this at all. It's very easy to get mistaken between the right side and the wrong side. And make sure you pin within that seam allowance, just in case you put a ladder or a run in your fabric. Now this end is going to be just completely run off, so don't worry about it too much, and it will be trimmed off later with your overlocker when we go to attach the back to the front. So this effectively is creating a crossover yoke position. So when you're ready, come to the side. So this is the right hand side as we're wearing the garment. We're going to overlock that into place, and as I said, this end is going to get slightly cut off when we sew the yoke into place, or the back seam, so don't worry too much if you're struggling matching that perfectly. So sew a few stitches, make sure you take out your pins just to secure that work into place, and that'll just help like another pair of hands as you start to sew. So what we need to do now is ease out that neckband between the centre front point and the back point. So you can probably see now why I said it. Sometimes it's a good idea to stitch that into place. So overlock that together. So if we turn this so that we're facing the back, we want to make sure that this side, which is the right hand side as you wear it, is on top of the left hand side as you wear it. And I'm just going to pin those notches together just for now. Now they don't actually sew together, this is just to hold it together to make it a little bit easier to work with our fabric as we move forward. So before we sew this, we need to go ahead and sew the centre back seam of the back piece. So here is my back pieces right sides together, and you'll see a notch here, so that notch there will match to the outside of that fold over, but we'll deal with that in a minute. So what seam we're going to sew is this long straight one, and as you go down it there'll be double notches to match, and that's just to make sure you don't stretch this out of place. So it doesn't matter whether you sew it from the top to the hemline or the hemline to the top. It's generally a good idea when you're sewing garments to sew them all in the same direction. So all the seams you sew from the top to the bottom, or the bottom to the top. Open this up, and what we're going to do is place this right sides together to the front piece. Alright, so work out which way is top, and you'll know that because you'll see the sleeve extension here, and place the back piece right side up like this. Then get the front piece you were working with earlier and place it so we have right sides together. So we're going to start by matching the sleeve area where the cuff is going to be, and just hold that in place within the seam allowance with a pin. Right, so as we come across, here's the centered back seam, and there's a notch here and then there's a notch here on the other side. So these notches match it to these notches here. So I'm going to take this pin out now. I'm just going to reposition it. So that notch on this side matches to that notch there. And I'll hold that into place. And then the other notch matches to that one there. It doesn't really matter if you sew the wrong layer up, but it's, in a perfect world, it would be good that we have right over left as you're wearing it. Okay, so now what should happen is that the very edge of your seam allowance here should be directly on top of that notch there. Can you see that? So the notch there matches exactly where we started sewing there, and then that notch goes on top of it. And on this side it's a little bit easier because we don't have to worry about sandwiching it as we go. Now if you find it easier, stitch that down with a plain sewing machine before you go any further. So on this side what we have is notch, notch, and then the tail end of our neckband. And exactly where the stitching started, which is here, not here, where the 6mm is, should sit on that notch like so. So that's what we're looking for, and then come across to the other side and hold that in place with a pin as well. And if it doesn't make sense quite at the moment, you'll see once we've overlocked it what we're looking for. And remember to cut off all this excess overlocking thread with the blade as you go. Now there should be no need to stretch any of this, it should just perfectly go into place. Now we do need to match those notches at the beginning because those notches will show us the position for our cuff. Okay, so this is the back, centre back neck area we're talking about here. So make sure it's all nice and flat. Make sure you take out your pins. So this is what we want the centre back area to look like. We want a crossover. So let's have a look at the hemline. So I'm on the front and I'm coming down the garment to the right hand side seam. And this is the same on the left hand side seam, and it's same at the back as well. Down the side seam towards the hem, you're going to see two notches. There's an upper notch here, and then there's a drill hole directly opposite it, and then there's a second notch lower again. What we're going to do is overlock from above the higher notch all the way around to the same position on the other side, and we're going to do that for the front and the back. So that means we need to go at least, at the very least, an inch, so 2 to 3 centimetres. I suggest 1 3/16 of an inch above the higher notch. So we want to go from here all the way around the bottom to the same position on the other side. And when you do that right side up. Now if you have a cover stitcher, you're going to skip this step because you're going to cover stitch the hem later. But if you're just using an overlocker and a plain sewing machine, go ahead and overlock that now. You can go higher than 3 centimetres, 1 3/16 of an inch if you want, but don't go any lower than that. And you need to still be able to see your notches when you've finished. So there's my lower notch there. And here is the lower hem of my back, the upper notch and a lower notch just in there. And I'm going to start 3 centimetres, which is 1 3/16 of an inch above the upper notch for here as well. So you can see my drill hole here and a notch, and then my second notch here. So place your front to your back, right sides together, and we're going to start overlocking at the armhole edge down towards the set of notches that we referred to earlier. Now we're only going to overlock as far as the first notch, so the notch that's closest to the upper body. As you go down the side, there will be a notch to match as well. So these first notches here are just to show you the position of the cuff that we're going to do shortly. And here is the first notch that we're going to match, which is just slightly at the underarm position. Right, so here is the notch positions that we referred to earlier. So what we want to do is overlock up to the higher notch, and then we're just going to run the overlocking off. So we've basically just overlapped the overlocking like that. Now go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So to finish this off, come back to your plain sewing machine and let's just have a look. So here is the notch that we've run our overlocking off at, and here is the lower notch position. And if you look at the pattern, there's a drill hole directly opposite that notch position, and that's around about there. I don't know if you can actually see it very well with the chalk. What we need to do is to stitch in the top of the split. So the top of the split runs in from the side of the fabric. So place your fabric so that the seams match up, and then come to an area just above that top notch. So here's the top notch and I'm coming to here. What we need to do is we need to sew in a straight line from here, which is our 6mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, right down and stop directly on top of that drill hole position there, which is opposite that notch. And this is how we're going to create our deeper hemline. I'll take that out, it might be a bit easier to see. Right, so place those edges directly on top of each other, and it's going to angle out. We're going to go from 6mm here to, it's about 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch. So remember to back tack and just come right to the edge of the stitching line with the overlocking. Come down and stop directly on that drill hole, and then back tack. So what this is doing is creating our hem allowance like this, which we'll go on to do in a moment. So when you've done it on this side, make sure you do exactly the same thing on the other side. Start above, directly on the edge of that 1/4 inch 6mm seam allowance. put the seams directly on top of each other. I'll take those pins away. Find the drill hole which is directly opposite the notch, the lower notch, which is here, and then stitch down to it. And stop and back tack. Right, so now we're going to go ahead and press in our hem allowance. So the hem allowance for this is 1.5 centimetres, which is 9/16 of an inch. So go to your iron and press that hem allowance in, and if you've got a cover stitcher you can just go and cover stitch that into place now. If you don't have access to a cover stitcher, I'll show you how to do it just with using the plain stitch on our sewing machine here. So I've pressed the hem into place, and now I'm going to sew it. So I'm going to start at a side seam, and what I'm going to do is sew directly through the overlocking line, and I'm going to come up, oh, I'm not quite sure, I'll decide when I get there, but maybe the same distance I'm sewing from the fold to the overlocking above the split position here, the join position, and then I'm going to go across and down. So I'm going to go stitch up, stop with my needle down on my work, turn and pivot across, turn and pivot, and then just continue until I get back to the start position. Now I like to sew my hems from the wrong side. It's entirely up to you. I'm also going to, I'm not going to start on the side seam here. I think I'll just start on this side. Yeah, around about here. So I'm probably 1/2 inch, which is 1.25 centimetres, just above here. So the main thing when I do this is just to make sure that I maintain the width the whole way around, and that I'm not causing any roping, which is, or tunnelling, which is those wavy lines you see. Now if you stitch this and you do get some tunnelling, you can narrow the seam allowance, the hem allowance down. So it's set at 1.5 centimetres. You could narrow that right down, and that would stop a lot of that tunnelling. Okay, so I've reached my start position. I'm just going to back tack there and finish that off. Now if you'd like to sew a second row of stitching, go ahead. I'm going to do it from the right hand side, and I think I'll just start right at that edge of the crossways stitching, and I'm just going to use my presser foot as a guide as to the width. Now clearly use a twin needle if you have it, or a cover stitcher. so go to your iron and press that into place, and then we can move on. So when you're at this stage with the T, we're going to treat the hemline quite differently from the hemline of the dress. The hemline's actually joined here as the hemline of the dress is split up the side seam. And I'd also like to say, if you don't like the way your deep scoop neck fits, like you don't like the scoop of it, what you can do is turn it into a V-neck. So to turn it into a V-neck, I'll just show you, just match the seams like that. So we find the centre back here and match it through to the centre front. And to create this into a V-neck, all you need to do is on your flat machine, just sew a little wedge shape from there, from the folded edge, and finish just at the overlocked edge of the corner. So that will give you a little mitre like that, and that's how you'll create a V neckline. That's if you don't like the way this sits. The whole point of it is that it does sit very low, loose and quite slouchy, but each to their own. So what we're going to do now is sew the hemline for this T. So it's sort of similar to the other one. What we're going to do, instead of going up to a notch position, you'll see the hemline looks like this at the front. We're just going to overlock on the raw edge from side to side, or if you have a cover stitcher, all you're going to do is turn that up at the notch position and cover stitch that hem into place. So that's the front taken care of, and for the back it's pretty much the same thing except the extension's slightly longer. So because I'm not using a cover stitcher, what I'm going to do now is go to my iron and press that into position, and the allowance is shown by the notch at the side seam, but it's 9/16 of an inch, which is 1.5 centimeters. And now I'm going to stitch the hemline in. I'm going to sew my first line of stitching through the overlocking. Okay, so I'm going to sew a second line of stitching now. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing on the front. Right, so I'm going to give those a press, then we're going to move back to our overlocker to sew in the side seam. For the side seams on the t-shirt, what we do is match the hemlines at the hem position, and you'll see that there is a difference in height between the front and the back, and that's fine, but we want to make sure where we're going to sew the matches, and then as we go up the side seam there'll be a notch to match, and we're going to sew overlock all the way through to the armhole opening. So it's probably a good idea that you start down on the hemline to sew it. It'll just make sure it's absolutely accurate, and make sure you've got a teeny bit of a tail on your overlocker too, because we need to tuck that in later. And then come to do the same thing on the hem on the other side. So now we need to move to our plain sewer to finish that off. So to finish off the hemline of the t-shirt version, first of all you need to know which is the back. What we want to do is we want to make sure this hem sits towards the back. So come to the right side, place your work right side up. Here's your overlocking thread. Snip it back to about 1 inch, which is 2.5 centimeters. What we're going to do is roll that overlocking thread towards the back. So this is the back and this is the front. So sandwich it in that little area there, because what happens is if we cut it off it's going to fray up. We want to hide it within that seam. So tuck it in like that and open that up. And all we do now is run a couple of stitches directly on top of these hemming stitches, and that will just force that hem to sit towards the back, and at the same time it'll catch in our overlocking thread. Now you could do it to both rows if you want, there's no need to do it to both, but you could. So that's that one done. So now this is the front and that's the back. I'll just trim off that thread just sitting there. So this is the front and that's the back. Trim this off. We want that seam to sit that way towards the back, so we're just going to roll that overlocking thread up and in, tuck it in there, push the seam over and stitch just a couple of stitches, 2 or 3, and a back tack. And then of course what you can do then is go and trim off any stray threads that you might see. So you could trim off any of that excess overlocking tail that might come through. You can just do a bit of a tidy up like that, and so that will give us a really nice finish at the hemline, and we've ended up with a lovely split. So this is the right hand sleeve as if you're wearing the garment. So to create the cuffs, now you can overlock this raw edge if you want to, but there's really no need. It's not going to run and you're not going to see it. So what I suggest you do is come to the underarm seam here and making sure that seam is pushed away from you, so that's towards the back. We're just going to trim this back to around about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. Then what we're going to do is we're going to fold over at the first notch, which is there, and fold over again to the second notch, so that that's all hidden within. And all we're going to do now is making sure that seam that overlocking is on the back side of the garment, we're just going to do what's called a little bar tack. So basically it's just a little back tack forwards and backwards, right on that seam line if you can, just 3 or 4 times to hold that cuff into place. Then come up to this seam here. So this is the back, the faux yoke. With this seam, what we want to do is we want to make sure this seam is that way, facing away from you, towards the back. So same thing again, trim your overlocking back. We're going to fold that up. So we're going to fold this towards you. So we're putting right sides together at the first notch there. And then we're going to roll it again at the second notch there. So that notch should be right on the edge there and right on the edge there. And same thing again, when you're ready, making sure all that overlocking is in the correct position, just run a few lines forward, a few stitches forward and backwards to hold that into place. So as you can tell here, on the short run of the back, because we have a displaced seam, and trim any stray threads away, that's really not going to be a problem. We're not going to need to worry to do anything more about that. But what you may find when you're wearing this on the front is that this can happen because the seam is quite long. So what we're going to do is just maintaining the width of that there, match the seams there and find the halfway point. You can see what I've done there. This is the back, this is the front. Match the seams like that and find that halfway point there, and just pop a couple of little tacking stitches there as well. So I'm just stitching them right on the edge of that fold and then trim that off like that. Now of course, if you don't like the way of doing this cuff, you could always just sew a regular hem into place there, and that's how we create our cuff. Now you can iron that if you want. When you launder it, it's just a matter of when you go to hang it up, just make sure it's turned in, because sometimes it can look a bit messy, or if you're a good ironer you can iron that and it'll be fine. So that's our cuff on this side, so just go and repeat that on the other side. So go ahead and press that into place and your garment is finished. So thanks for joining me with this sew along video. I hope you enjoy this garment with that displaced shoulder seam. It's just a nice little twist on a regular t-shirt. So I hope you join me again soon for my next sew along video.